we are filming this, so if you did miss anything, you can always refer back to the video online. It's online right now. We're actually live right now, so you guys are famous. Just kidding. But yeah, we're filming it, so don't worry if you miss something. You can catch it after the fact, and then you can share the video and say, "I was there." Okay. All right, I think we're gonna start then. Yeah. Yeah, start. Yeah, 3, 2, 1, contact. Let me know when we're live. Give me a thumbs up. All right, we're here. We're live. And the first thing I want to say is aloha, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Hawaii's first annual symposium on safer technology. Say that 5 times fast. Yeah? Symposium. I love that word. My name is Ian. I'll be your host for today. As I say, we have 4 other speakers. I'm going to introduce them. There will be intermissions in between each speaker, but they're going to educate you guys today on their own expertise and knowledge on this topic. And there will be a Q&A after the fact. We are filming. You can watch the video afterwards. But I just want to thank you guys for making it out here today on this Saturday. So thank you very much for coming out on your Saturday and spending time. Especially we have someone from Maui. So thank you for coming all the way from Maui to do this here today. And also thank you for the speakers. So just give me a round of applause for our speakers and yourselves for showing up today. This is the first, so this is kind of historic here, guys. As I said, my name is Ian, and I'm hosting. And how did I get into Safe Tech? Real quick about me, I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm actually local, born and raised in Honolulu. My mother side of the family is local Hawaiian, Chinese. My father is from the military, he's from the mainland, so that's how I was, conceived. And growing up, my father in the military, he was a specialist in radio technology, so VLF waves, ELF, radio technician, and he's a very smart guy. He would give me books often about Nikola Tesla and frequencies. That kind of science, nerdy stuff there I used to study, so I was always aware of it. But I was born in the 80s, I'm from the 80s, and you guys can remember the 80s, it looks like, right? So we didn't have 5G back then, we didn't have this internet infrastructure that we have now. So I grew up without it, and I really didn't know about any of these issues until very recently. Around 2017, just by chance, I had adopted a dog, and I was taking care of my grandmother. My dog pushed my grandmother down by accident, so she hit her head, and then we had to take her to the hospital. I took my grandmother to the hospital, and when they x-rayed her head, they found a tumor inside of her skull, about almost the size of my fist. Yeah, and I couldn't figure out, luckily they said it was benign, but it was putting a lot of pressure on her brain, and it was creating Alzheimer's, and she was suffering from dementia. So I took care of her subsequently. And that was around 2017, but we couldn't figure out what was the cause of the tumor. Well, I noticed that my grandmother lived on the first floor of her apartment complex, and her particular unit was the unit which housed all of the smart meters for the entire building. So my grandmother literally slept up against the wall, with the back of her head towards the wall, against an array of meters that was right behind her. So I was wondering to myself if that had anything to do with her having a tumor at all, or her Alzheimer's. So I decided to look into it. I had no one to turn to, I had no one to talk to. This type of topic is very, commercialized. So the only time you ever really seem to hear about 5G or wireless is in a commercial when they're selling you a cell phone or some internet service. But there's not much awareness about any other side effects or any other aspects of that type of technology. So I bought my own meter. Thanks, Dad, for letting me know of such a thing that existed. So I went and I tested my grandmother's wall where she slept, and I found out that the levels of wireless radiation were far above normal accepted health levels. They were pretty much off the charts. Then I began to get worried that I thought perhaps there might be correlation between these high levels of radiation and my grandmother's tumor. Then, across the street, I also noticed that there was a big, what looked like crown of just like antennas getting put up on top of the 7-Eleven across the street from my house. I had never seen it before. It was just a bunch of like circular antennas. And I thought, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. That's such a strange looking group of antennas. But I had a headache whenever I would go into the area. So I started to wonder if I was electrosensitive, or if this type of technology was strong enough to actually make people feel physical effects. So once again, I took my meter out and I just walked around the parking lot of the 7-Eleven, and the levels were through the roof. Then I got in my car, I got my phone, and I just simply drove around Honolulu. And I found that most of the areas in Honolulu were registering on the radiation scale way above safety levels in Honolulu, and I was kind of shocked. So, long story short, I sought out SafeTech. As far as I knew and know, they're the only people in Hawaii addressing the safety issues of this technology that could give me the answers. So that's when I sought out Dr. Debra Greene, who will be one of our speakers later today. She kind of helped me validate some of my concerns and solidify my concerns. So I've been interested in the topic ever since then. Before, I was one of those people that was very into the consumerism of the situation. Every new iPhone, I felt I had to get it, right? Faster internet, I had to get it. But then I would test my Wi-Fi router after I became aware, and I realized this technology may not be so safe. I changed my whole life. I stopped sleeping in the same room with my cell phone. I turned my cell phone off when I didn't use it. I spoke on speakerphone because I was worried that if I held my cell phone on my head, that I would get a tumor like my grandmother. And these things are comparable to cigarettes almost in a way, where once they were first released, a lot of people denied the health effects of cigarettes, but only years later we saw that people developed cancer from smoking the cigarettes. So I thought this might be a similar situation, and our experts will address that later on today. You know, it is a serious issue, but there is hope. That's why we're here today, right? We wouldn't be here talking about it if there wasn't hope. And things to learn, ways to keep safe, and our experts are going to help you. So without further delay, guys, I want to introduce one of our first speakers. Everybody's going to give you their story. And our first speaker today will be Ethan D. Onofrio. Sorry, I don't want to put D'Onofrio. D'Onofrio, okay. Ethan D'Onofrio. Ethan D'Onofrio has been a computer technician and IT consultant for nearly 30 years. He's been deploying wireless technology since its inception after being hospitalized and watching several friends die from brain tumors. He now consults on the serious health risks associated with wireless technology we're now living with. So he's going to share his story with us, guys, and he's going to explain a little bit more about that. And I will now pass the microphone to Ethan. So let's welcome Ethan to the conference, guys.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone for showing up. It's a beautiful Saturday in Hawaii. I know there's plenty of things you could be doing besides sitting in this hot room. Yeah, I kind of just want to give you guys some kudos for choosing to do this today. It's not a super happy, fun topic we're discussing. So, you know, give yourself a pat on the back for showing up. Smart decision. Thanks for being here. So without further ado, let's get started.
Don't do it!
Why, you guys are looking at me like I'm crazy. Why are you looking at me like that?
Dangerous.
Dangerous? How do you know that?
Technology.
So you learned from technology that smoking is dangerous? Research? So, right, we all know this now, right? We all know that smoking's bad for you. But 60 years ago, half of the adult population in this country smoked. 45% to be exact, but yeah, 1965, 45% of the population in this country smoked, and not many people were really thinking about it. So, right, Chesterfield was giving us scientific facts in support of smoking. More doctors were smoking Camels at that time, right? It's probably true. In the 40s and the 50s, studies started coming out about smoking, about the health risks of smoking tobacco. And it wasn't until 1964, I believe, that the Surgeon General finally issued a proclamation saying, yeah, it's bad for your health. So decades, literally decades went by between when those first studies came out about smoking and when our government acknowledged that it might be a problem. In those couple of decades, I don't know how many people died. It's hard to find that statistic. I'm guessing millions, probably, from lung cancer and associated health problems. So, you know, this is the government looking out for us. It took 7,000 studies. 7,000 studies had come out before the Surgeon General said that there was a health concern. Okay. Right. This is the same era of DDT is good for me to eat. Right. What day at the beach isn't complete without getting hosed down by DDT? Right. Public pool. You want to get a swim and some DDT in the face. This is the school lunchroom. Right. Getting blasted with DDT. Study finds no link between cancer risk and DDT exposure. Like it or not, DDT is good for you. Right? These are the news articles that were happening. And then a hero came along by the name of Rachel Carson. Kind of got people to wake up. And then we have DDT cause mutation in rats, DDT linked to pancreatic cancer in humans, and finally DDT banned totally effective December 31st. And ultimately, the EPA moves to reduce DDT contamination, right? So this was something that we were all being told was good for us. We went from it being good for us to it causing health problems to now we got to clean up the mess, right? This is the history of our country. So this was finally banned in 1972. And fast forward a couple decades. Here's me in the robot costume. I'm about 12 years old in this picture. Got the motherboards attached to my robot costume. I started building computers after school when I was 12. We couldn't afford a computer at the time, but we found a way for me to get trained by a family friend for me to build my own computer, save us some money, and I got a computer. I started working after school then, building computers every day. This caveman over here on the right, he was my first customer. So I got my first cell phone in 1999. It was this one, Nokia 5160. I'd already actually had a cordless phone for about 5+ years at that point. And I talked on that cordless phone a lot, right? Like every night I was on that cordless phone talking. And then when I got my cell phone, it was an amazing thing, right? At the time, cell phones were new. Previously, they'd been these big giant bricks. This thing fit oh so easily into the pocket. It was, you know, represented freedom. You know, I was 17, 18 years old when I got that phone, and all of a sudden I could talk to everybody whenever I wanted. Amazing thing. So then fast forward a few more years, and I'm working at a computer company. We're building about 2,000 computers a year. This is me and the president of Intel at the time. 2003, Intel launched what was called Centrino. Now, this was important because prior to this, there weren't really any standards for wireless technology. So we were selling these computers and wireless gear, and stuff just didn't talk to each other. You had to buy the same brand of this and the same brand of that, and nobody had standardized anything. And so Intel made this big push to standardize everything so that you could just go buy a laptop, buy a wireless access point, and everything would just work. And it was fantastic. I had spent the previous decade crawling under houses, running Ethernet cable to people's computers to create networks, climbing up on ladders, drilling through walls. And so when wireless became standardized, It was amazing, right? I mean, it was really convenient. We had coffee stores all over the region calling us, asking us to wire up their place, put in wireless access points. You know, it was like the big thing. So we deployed a lot of access points. A lot of home access points, did a lot of external outdoor access points, commercial grade access points. I mean, I've probably installed personally, I don't know, many hundreds of access points. Our company installed thousands probably. And incidentally, we had access points in our business. At one point, I was working a retail counter and we had an access point right on the wall, like literally right here, like arm's reach from my head. And I worked with a laptop on my lap for years, right? This was the thing. I had a desk that looked similar to this. At home, I had the access point next to it. You know, at work, the access point was a little further away, but the wireless laptop, the cell phone, wireless keyboard and mouse, maybe a cordless phone, right? This is pretty typical. This is typical of a workspace. It's typical of a lot of people's homes now. It's typical of a lot of my clients. This is what I see going into my clients. Along the way, I started having some health issues, and I just didn't really connect the dots. The first thing was I had a cancerous tumor removed from the right side of my nose. Later, I had other issues, all incidentally on the right side of my head, right-handed. So we'll come back to that. I'll talk more about those health issues, but they started to progress. And ultimately, I found myself up at Gila Medical in the hospital. Spent a couple weeks up there. This is actually the second time I was in the hospital. This isn't the first time, and I know that because I don't look like I'm about to die in this picture. The first time I went to the hospital, I did look like I was about to die. I weighed about 120 pounds. I'm 6'2". And it was a bad situation. My digestive system had basically just shut down to the point where I was no longer able to not only eat food, I couldn't even take water. I'd take a sip of water and it was back up. So they checked me into the hospital, put me on an IV. I had like 5 tubes running down my arm. I was in the hospital for a couple weeks. And ultimately the doctors told me that I had Crohn's disease. I didn't know what Crohn's disease was. It sounded kind of scary. Like, why do I have a disease? I'm, not even 40 years old. Pretty healthy guy. I exercise. I eat, organic food. Why did this happen to me? And the doctors kind of all just shrugged their shoulders. Nobody knew. Nobody could tell me. They basically said, we don't really know why people get this disease. It comes by many names, and a lot of people, I think, suffer different variations of it, whether it's colitis, leaky gut syndrome, irritable bowel, diverticulitis. All of these are very closely related. They're all basically malfunctions of the lower gastrointestinal tract. I won't get into the gory details. Let's just say it's not fun. It happens in areas that you would rather function properly in your body. Incidentally, for me, it happened in those areas closest to where I had that cell phone in my pocket for 20 years. I still hadn't connected the dots though. I didn't. I thought it was a diet thing. I changed my diet. I hadn't really put 2 and 2 together, despite the fact that I'd had numerous warning signs. At this point, I'd actually had my first client die of a brain tumor. And she worked at a desk like you saw earlier. Hers was even worse. She had a shelf above her desk and she had her access point literally 2 feet in front of her head. And she died of brain cancer, brain tumor. But I hadn't really put it all together. The nurse came into my room one day. She had a little bag with the radioactive symbol on the baggie. And she comes in, she's like, time for your medicine. I said, well, what's with the radioactive pill? She said, well, this is going to be your medicine. I said, how long am I going to be taking that for? She said, well, you're going to take this for the rest of your life. I said, no, I think I want to do a little research before I take a radioactive pill. And she said, okay, well, I'm going to go get the doctor. And I'm going to leave the pill here with this plastic cup. When you take the pill, don't touch the pill. Open the plastic bag and pour it into the plastic cup and then swallow it. And I looked at her and are you hearing what you're saying? Does that sound... So I didn't take the pill, right? I wanted to find a better option. And so I started doing a lot of research. Turns out that pill causes pancreatic cancer in about half the people who take it. And I changed my diet, and I was able to slowly get better. They put me on a steroid, and I slowly got better, but it was still like something was just keeping me unhealthy, and I couldn't figure it out. And I should mention that prior to me going into the hospital, I've been working on a project at my desk. It was a video editing project, and I had all my wireless gear all around me for like 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And then when I started getting sick, I was sleeping in that room because I was up all night coughing and going to the bathroom. And so it was 24 hours a day. I had all this wireless gear around me. I didn't think about it. I didn't know, right? I mean, I've been deploying this stuff for 20 years. I had no idea. And I must say that cognitive dissonance is a very powerful thing. I really just did not want to accept that all these devices were causing me harm. So things went on, and then I noticed one day, and this isn't a very good picture. You can't see it very well, but that's my finger. And I don't know if you guys probably can't see it. It gets really bad between my fingers. And what I noticed was one weekend, I was mentioning to my wife, it's strange that during the week, my hand is just on fire with this like burn. And then by the end of the weekend, it's gone, or almost gone. And then the week starts up again and it comes back. And I finally realized I have my hand on a cordless mouse, a wireless mouse all week. And I use my cell phone during the week and I turn it off on the weekends. And so I got rid of my cordless mouse, I got a wired mouse, and it went away, it stopped. And so what you see on my hand now is from the few minutes a day that I hold my cell phone. And we'll come to that later. But that was when I really started to connect the dots. And then I started noticing other things, like for instance, I've had dandruff issues for a long time, but then I really noticed it's really bad around my right ear and almost non-existent on the left side of my head. And I don't know if you can see it here, but there's almost a line down my chin where the gray hair is on the right side of my face and not on the left side of my face. And then I had a really serious problem with my right eye. My right eye was goofed up for many months. I went to the eye doctor. They gave me the pink pills, the red pills, nothing fixed it. So all these problems that kept manifesting on the right side of my face, skin problems on my right shoulder. And so I started connecting the dots, started doing more research. And while I was researching Crohn's disease, I was starting to look into the wireless thing. I came across this bioinitiative report. And the bioinitiative report was basically this group of scientists from all around the world, physicists and biologists and electrical engineers, you name it. I think in like 27 different countries. And they went and looked at all of these studies that had been done, 2,000 studies. They rounded up 2,000 studies about wireless exposure, wireless radiation exposure, and health problems. And they analyzed these studies for integrity, basically, to look at if the studies were done properly, if the data was collected in an unbiased manner, so on and so forth. And then basically summarized what they found in those 2,000 studies. And ultimately, what they found was that bioeffects are clearly established. Right? This is after reviewing 2,000 studies. And then a few years...
Repeat that again, the conclusion.
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you for asking. Bioeffects are clearly established. So in other words, wireless radiation is linked to biological effects on living entities. And then they actually, a few years later, they rounded up another 1,800 or 2,000 studies. And again, basically the same thing. This is from their results page. You can go online and look at this. But this is showing, of the studies they reviewed, this is the percentage that show that there are clear effects correlations, and this is the percentage that show that there are no effects. And so what you see for radio frequency is 68% show, 68% of the studies, of the 423 radio frequency studies they looked at, 68% of them show that there are indeed health effects associated. EMF, so this is a slightly probably different frequency, different classification, 84% show an effect, 74%. This is neurological issues here, and on down the line. Now, why are we seeing 32% show no effect? Well, so I stumbled upon this TED Talk done by a guy named Jeremy Johnson, and they rounded up a bunch of these wireless studies, and what they looked at was of the studies that are non-industry funded studies, right? Studies that are independent studies, 70% of those studies showed a harmful effect. Of the industry studies, the funded studies, these are studies that are funded by the telecom industry, the lobby, right? Only 32% show a harmful effect. how about that? So, kind of looks like they're trying to cover it up, is what I make of that. You know, make of it what you will. But yeah, the independent studies basically, the preponderance of them show that there's clearly an issue, health problems. This is my friend Tavis. He was on my soccer team back at the computer store. He died a few years back of a brain tumor. He was an engineer. He was a gamer, spent a lot of time at his computer. Just a really fun, wonderful person. He was 43 years old. This is my friend Mike. Mike worked with me at Northwest Computer. One of the most wonderful men I've ever met. Very, very kind, loving man. Did a lot for the community. He died 3 years ago, brain tumor. He was an IT technician, right? So he was around the same wireless gear I was. Now, can I say that wireless radiation caused the brain tumor in these two people? Of course not. I mean, I can't say that for certain. This is anecdotal evidence, as is all of my health stuff that I've given you. The problem is that when you take it on the whole, when you look at all of these studies, and then when you look at the control studies, where they put rats in the cage, and these rats have a cell phone on the cage, and these rats don't, and they separate them in rooms, and they come back, and these rats are all full of tumors. That's a controlled study, right? And so if we take the controlled studies, and then we take these studies that are slightly less controlled with people, the picture seems pretty clear.
Well, one of the factors that may not have been in the study was a correlation of how much metals they had in their body. Because they died within 2 years, they may have gotten injection with a lot of metals.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all being exposed to plenty of toxins, right? I just had the mercury fillings drilled out of my teeth a couple years ago. Anyone who has metal dental amalgams has mercury in their mouth. We're all eating glyphosate on our food that's been sprayed with Roundup. We're breathing off gas. So there's all kinds of environmental toxins. Wireless radiation is just one of those toxins. But what we're starting to see now is that it's a pretty serious one. And so I ended up going back to the hospital about a year later. This time I had to get surgery. Again, lower GI problems, not a lot of fun. Spent another week plus in the hospital. That time when I went into the hospital, so I still, believe it or not, a year later, I still hadn't figured it out. And this was when I kind of started piecing it together. When I went back to the hospital the second time, again, I'd been around a lot of wireless gear for a while. I was staying up at my parents' house on the mainland. They had a Wi-Fi booster next to my room. I was on my cell phone. Poor signal on the cell phone, which makes the phone broadcast a lot louder. Lots of contributing factors. And now I'm seeing weekly clients. So I do computer work mostly, right? People call me out to fix their computers, their printers, whatever. And every week I'm seeing clients with health issues that I feel pretty certain are related to how much wireless radiation they're getting. You know, and I judge that based on what I'm seeing on my meter, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and what I've seen in the studies and how much radiation it takes to trigger some of these health responses. And Debra, who's after me, she's going to be talking a little bit more about the specifics of these health issues. So the last thing I want to point out about this is that as much wireless radiation as I had growing up and working in the computer industry, the younger generation today is getting way more, right? I mean, these kids are glued to their phones. They've got wireless devices in their ear canals. They're sitting next to wireless access points, you know, on a regular basis. This is a concern for the younger generation. My friend Tom told me the other day his girlfriend's daughter was going in for her 3rd brain surgery to remove tumors. She's 22 years old. So what are we talking about here? This is the electromagnetic spectrum, right? And on the far end we have like electricity, AM radio, FM radio. Over here we've got X-rays, gamma radiation. We know that over here this is like Chernobyl, Hiroshima kind of a situation.
So what do you say about ultrasounds or sonograms? Because I saw a podcast that they say that's just sound waves, but I heard from a podcast that was worth 250 X-rays.
Good question. So the question was, what about sonograms or ultrasounds? So my specific field of expertise is right in this area, right here. I do know that there is a lot of scientific evidence out there that talks about this area, and certainly we know about this area. So I can't answer your question directly. I don't have the studies to refer to, but what I can say is there's definitely been correlation down here with dirty electricity. I mean, you've heard don't live under power lines, right? That sort of thing. So this would be like a lower frequency electric fields. And then up here, this is Hiroshima, Chernobyl sort of situation, and visible light. And I constantly hear people say, well, this is non-ionizing, so it's not harmful. Go lay outside in the sun for 6 or 7 hours and tell me how you feel at the end of the day. Okay, we know that this can certainly cause problems. Now, how fast it causes problems, that's a different story. And that's the biggest problem right here, is that for most people, it's not immediate harm, right? If I go lay out in the sun and get sunburned in 8 hours, I can figure that out. It took me 20 years to start really having serious health problems here. So there's another problem with this, diagram here that I wanted to point out, which is that it shows cell phones, cell towers, Wi-Fi, and microwaves next to each other, when in reality, they're all basically right in the same spot on the spectrum. They're all right at 2 gigahertz, or 2.4 gigahertz. Cell phones operate around 1.9, 2.1, depending on your carrier. Wi-Fi, so the cell phones operate around 2 gigahertz, but then your cell phone also has Wi-Fi on it and it also has Bluetooth on it. That's all at 2.4 gigahertz, which incidentally is the exact same frequency that your microwave oven cooks food. So we're talking about the same microwaves, just a lower power. Yes?
The TV is kind of halfway in there.
Well, I just drew that circle on there. Don't worry about it.
So the TV, if you don't have it hooked up to anything but a DVD player, is it still doing anything?
Good question. We'll talk about that a little bit later, particularly with smart TVs, because that throws in a whole new
I mean,
element.
it's plugged into the wall.
Right,
out.
right. So there'd be an electrical field, but with the new TVs, the smart TVs, they're emitting wireless in 2.4 gigahertz. But the takeaway here, and this is, when I was working at the computer company, we had our Intel technical rep came up, and he was explaining that wireless uses 2.4 gigahertz because it's really good at going through things, right? If you buy a wireless router, you want to be able to put it on one end of your house, and you want to be able to go to the other end of your house and work on your laptop. It penetrates through walls, it penetrates through people. It is good at penetration. That's why we use 2.4 gigahertz, which incidentally is the same as the microwave. And that was kind of the first time doesn't it seem like a possible health issue if we're all going to have microwaves next to our bodies? And the response was, well, no, it's only like a watt or less, whereas your microwave oven is 1,500 watts. The problem is that your hot pocket's done in a minute in your microwave, right? We've all been carrying these phones around on our bodies for decades, right? So the long-term effect is the issue here, and it's doubly problematic because people don't realize that this is a cumulative issue. And this is what a lot of the studies have shown, and Debra's going to talk about, is that this cumulative effect basically suggests, and this has been my experience, this has been the experience with my clients, and this is what the studies show, is that when your body is exposed to radiation, it takes your body a very long time to repair that damage. Right, so if you go and get an MRI or a CAT scan or an X-ray, you know, they tell you like, give it a year, right, before you get another CAT scan, because it takes your body a long time to regenerate. The problem is that we're now living in a world, it's nonstop, right? It's 24 hours a day. We picked this room here in downtown Gila because it's got metal siding around it, and the owner has installed Ethernet cables as opposed to blasting us all with wireless. Otherwise, I would be in full protective gear as opposed to just my entire body. We'll talk about this more later too. But the point is that you're being exposed to wireless radiation. Most people are being exposed to wireless radiation 24 hours a day. And so there is no ability for the body to make those repairs that it needs to. I used to suggest that people look for phones that had a lower SAR rating. The SAR rating is the specific absorption rate. That's what that stands for. Basically, this is a number of how much radiation the phone emits. The takeaway here is that phones are getting worse and worse. right? We're emitting more and more radiation with each new generation of phones. And it's pretty hard to find a phone that's not just through the roof on the star rating. So it's kind of a fruitless task at this point to try and find a low star rating phone. I mean, you can certainly try, but it's really not good enough. Yeah, in fact, they're making a comeback. I just saw this video where dumb phones are kind of starting to make a comeback.
I saw it on Facebook. So
Yeah, and they are much lower radiation, at least the ones that I've seen and tested. And we'll come back to that.
there's not a computer on your phone, man.
Right. One of the problems is that the FCC, the agency that people would like to think is protecting us, although they're really not. The FCC, their job is to assign radio frequencies, not to protect people, really. They did make a safety limit back in 1996, 26 years ago, right? Like this was in what, 2G, maybe 3G era, long before we were all being, cooked by all these devices. And actually the FCC was recently sued because it was determined that when they made that decision about the safety limit, they didn't even review the evidence. It was just arbitrary. And so the US Court of Appeals basically ruled against them that they were essentially negligent when they set this 26-year-old arbitrary safety limit. And so that's why phone companies actually in the back of the phone manual have to put a little warning. So this is an iPhone. SAR measurement exceeds the FCC's guidelines. Don't hold the phone next to your head, right? But people don't read those little books. Nobody, right? The first thing you do is toss the book. Great shiny new phone. Specific absorption rate. So that's how much radiation your body's going to absorb with this phone. And basically every phone out there now has some sort of notice like this in a little tiny print at the back of your phone manual. So the FCC safety limit, basically meaningless. And so this is a chart that shows cell phone towers since 2000 to 2020. We're rapidly approaching about 500,000 cell phone towers in this country. And with the 5G rollout, there's a proposed 1 million plus more what are called small cell tower sites or small cell sites where they're just sticking them on anything now, lampposts and road signs and you name it. They don't need a big giant tower anymore. They, wherever they can put these things. So this is a chart that shows the number of connected devices, Internet of Things. These are the number of devices. So this was back when I started deploying wireless, early 2000s. We're rapidly approaching, we're actually about, 35 billion wireless devices on this planet right now?
5 billion?
35 billion, yeah, 35 billion. So we've got a lot of wireless devices out there. It's no longer just a wireless access point and a laptop and a phone. We went from this to this, right? So every single one of these phones is emitting to this. This is a home now. It's got the security cameras and the smart TV and the smart speaker and the Bluetooth this and doorbells. I was working on somebody's wireless doorbell the other day. Just absolutely filled with wireless devices. On the Environmental Health Trust website, it's a very good website. We'll talk more about it there. They've got this interesting page of what they call ridiculous technology. Wireless pacifiers, wireless Barbie, wireless plush toy. If you scroll down that page, there are significantly more disturbing wireless devices out there. It's pretty scary. So we're in the 1940s and the 1950s of the tobacco cycle, right? These studies are coming out and yet half the population, or in this case now, 99% of the population is using a device that they don't really understand is harming them. Yes?
I bought a 3-year-old Honda HRV 3 years ago. And I didn't, it's got everything, the Bluetooth, and then just within the last few months, I borrowed my friend's meter, because I started getting really worried about all this stuff that I wasn't seeing before. And it's radiating every time my car is turned on.
Yeah.
Motor.
Yeah.
And I called Honda and they said,
Yes.
Not just the Bluetooth.
Yes, this is correct. So we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But yeah, my parents came out for a visit. Their rental car it was blasting Wi-Fi. I used my meter. I couldn't sit in their car. And so the solution, is to pull the fuse for the entire audio system, navigation, you name it. But yeah, the most new cars now, not all, but most new cars,
15 on.
have a lot of wireless in the
So
car.
I've got a CD player and Bluetooth and
Right.
a radio.
Right.
I won't be able to use any of it. And
Yep. Okay. So yeah, Environmental Health Trust, they've got a whole page dedicated to some of these crazy wireless devices. Check them out. This is pretty common amongst my clients. I'll go out to work on their computer, their access point sitting right on their desk. A friend of mine, one of my clients, told me about her accountant who has ovarian cancer. She's had a wireless access point under her desk, right between her legs for a decade or so. Again, anecdotal, sort of, right? My friend Bob, he was having real serious problems with his left foot, was getting kind of burned and all sorts of circulation problems. Normally a pretty healthy guy, but his left foot was just terrible. I went and looked at his workspace and his access point was literally right next to his left foot. He was just getting cooked. Yes?
So it's only really around my legs and my speaker on that side where the radiation is high. Not even on the passenger side, but the speaker in that. And so I looked up clothing, EMF protection clothing, but then I also read that they don't really work.
Yeah, so we'll talk about Faraday fabric clothing. It does work. I wouldn't be dressed like this if it didn't. I have no choice but to cover up. The only reason I don't have my head covering on right now is because this room's... It can be both, and we'll come back to this. So when we come back around, we're going to be talking about what we do about this, right? So the first part of this symposium is what the problem is, really, so that you can clearly understand the issue, and then at the end we're going to talk about how you can deal with it. So we'll come back to that. This is pretty common. This is an app I use on my phone called Wi-Fi Analyzer. It shows all the wireless access points in range of my phone. I actually ran this last night in this room, and it was worse. In this room, there's probably 50% more access points visible from this spot right here, despite the fact that we have metal around the entire building. The other thing to keep in mind about this is that this is just what I'll call bona fide SSIDs, so actual named networks access points. This is not phones, this is not laptops, this is not Bluetooth speakers, this is not smart TVs, this is not any of those endpoint devices. This is just access points. And it looks even worse than this, right here in this room. So each one of these is emitting at 2.4 gigahertz. We could also do it for the 5 gigahertz range. That means that our bodies, as we stand right here in this room today, are being hit by 2.4 billion waves per second from every single one of these devices, right? All around us.
It's coming through the windows then.
Yeah, it's coming through the windows, coming through the walls. If anybody's phone isn't turned off, a lot of phones, even when they are turned off now, are emitting. But that wouldn't even show up here. This is literally, like I say, just bona fide access points. This doesn't even account phones. So this is common. I have clients who live in apartment complexes, and it looks 2-3 times worse than this, right? There's just no escape if you live with neighbors close by. There's just wireless everywhere. So the problem here, though, is that this doesn't tell you how much radiation you're actually being exposed to. For that, you actually need a meter, and we're going to be talking about meters today. If you really want to know how much radiation is coming in, you need an electric frequency meter. We'll talk about that. This is me out in front of KTA, down the highway. They've got 4 cell phone towers on that block, right over Bedmart, Cash and Carry, KTA. This right here is showing a reading of 2.6 milliwatts. We'll get into what this reading means in just a couple slides. The meter I use is called the Cornet Electro Smog Meter. There's several other pretty good meters out there. There's also a lot of cheap junky meters that really are not accurate. Good meter is going to run you around $200. I've seen some a little lower, some quite a bit higher, but I've seen people go out and spend like 30-40 bucks on these cheapo meters and they just don't do it. So let's talk about the numbers. right? I was showing you out here on the highway 2.6, and actually just outside this front door this morning, I took my meter out there, and it was at about 3.5. It spiked at about 4.5 milliwatts. So what does that mean? What does 3.5 milliwatts mean? So baseline, out at my house at Kaloli Point, or if you go out into the woods and you're not around anybody's Wi-Fi and you're not around any cell towers, 0.0002 milliwatts. Okay, that's what the human body has been living with for eons, right? Up until pretty recently, this is what we're all living with. So by the time we get into town, where the average is anywhere from 0.1 to 3, although like I said, it was even higher right outside this door. So sometimes, right, if you're a direct line of sight to a cell phone tower, this number might be significantly higher. We're talking about 500 to 15,000 times normal, just walking around town, right? Walking through Walmart, walking down the street. Now your cell phone, when you're making a call on your cell phone, if we hold the meter next to that phone, under the very best of circumstances, it's going to be 10. That's very rare. Most of the time, I would say an average phone call's in the 500 milliwatt range. I've seen some spike up. They max out my meter at 1600 plus. But 500 milliwatts is about normal. So this represents anywhere between 50,000 and 7.5 million times the amount of radiation that we normally absorb. That's why you don't hold your phone next to your head. Now the good news is, as the phone gets further away, this drops off pretty quickly. And so when it's out here, maybe it's only 50 milliwatts. So what, I don't know, 250,000 times or something, as opposed to several million. It's still not good. Cell phones are really like the biggest culprit. Again, without a meter, you're kind of guessing because things change a lot, right? If you're near a cell phone tower, your phone doesn't have to broadcast as loudly. If you're just barely in range and your phone's really trying to get signal, it's going to be going full blast. Okay, so without a meter though, you just don't know. I made this little chart. It's on a pamphlet. They were in here. It's up on my website. You can look at this. I just made this to kind of give you an idea of where things fall in terms of the amount of radiation, right? So this is typical living space down here in like the 1.5 to 3 milliwatt range, all the way up to cell phones and access points up at 500 plus milliwatts. And then everything in between. And then on the right side, these are some studies that were correlated to that number. So for instance, down here at 1 milliwatt, and Debra's going to talk about this, they did a study in Germany. This has been correlated to triple the cancer rate. And she'll probably talk about how that was done. But it doesn't take much, right? All the way down here at 0.02, we have sleep disorders, nervous problems, fatigue, limb pain. Right, so by the time we get up here, we're talking about leukemia, skin melanoma, bladder cancer, etc. Again, these are all reference studies. You can go look these up, pull the full study. I've got a bunch of them printed out. You can find them online and review them. So this is what our world looks like today, right? The kids are getting blasted day in and day out. This is from a newsletter I sent out during COVID. I went to a client's house, and this is what I saw. Kids sitting around in the living room, wireless access point in the corner. They were at most 10 feet away from this, at closest maybe 4 feet away from this. I went to work in the other room on a different kid's computer, and I heard in the living room this kid just like shrieking in pain. He was probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old maybe. Enough to get me up out of that room to go see what was going on. I went out there, this kid's going, my head, my head, my head. Grandma, my head. So I asked his grandma, what's going on with the kid? Screaming in pain. She said, oh, he gets migraines every day. The kid's 10 years old. He gets migraines every day. So I pulled my meter out because I looked and I saw. And so here's the problem. You can't see it, right? And so if you could see it, that's what you'd see, right? And this is really the big problem, is that as long as everybody can only see this because you don't have a meter and it's not visible, it's a lot harder to get concerned when you realize that this is actually the situation. So we wired it in. I said, you know, how about if we get rid of this Wi-Fi? They're all sitting 6 feet away from the internet anyways. Why don't we just run some cables and plug stuff in? And we're going to talk about this later today, how you do that. It's very inexpensive. It's very easy. We plugged all our devices in. I sent the woman a text message maybe 6 months later. I said, how's the kid's head doing? She said, oh, he hasn't had a migraine since that day.
Question?
Yes.
So you're talking about holding the cell phone next to your head. I got that. There are other options, speakerphone and then the wired earbuds. What's the relationship with those?
Yeah, so wired earbuds are good. They're not great. The problem is it's hard to get your phone far enough away even with the wired earbuds. The other thing is that the antenna can actually, or I'm sorry, the wire can actually act as sort of an antenna. And I've measured this with my meter. I heard that and I wasn't sure if I believed it. So I got on a call, I pulled my meter out and I like put my meter right next to the earpiece. And sure enough, yeah, it was clear that this was serving as sort of an antenna. It is better than holding the phone next to your head. Better yet are what are called air tubes. And I'll talk about that later. All of these things are steps in the right direction. Honestly, the best thing is just use your phone less, keep it away from your body. We'll talk about shielding. What I do at home, I use shielding. Shielding does work, Faraday fabric does work. So we'll talk about that as well. So looking back at this desk that I was sitting at and that so many of my clients were sitting at, really, you know, this is kind of a scary situation for me because that's really kind of what it looked like for 20 years for me. And it's no wonder I ended up in the hospital. You know, so now we're starting to see studies like this that show this is a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, and adult. It's worse for younger kids because the skull is thinner in younger kids' brain, or the radiation penetrates further into the brain. Obviously, it's even worse for unborn fetuses. I don't know if any of you watched that video that I sent out from the Environmental Health Trust, but they talked a lot about this and the effects it has on unborn fetuses. Those kids are then growing up and having problems that are lifelong problems. Next chart is from the UK Office for National Statistics. Unfortunately, it doesn't go any newer than 2014, but relative to 1995, this is brain tumors, this red line here in the temporal and frontal lobes. In 2014, we were up 350% relative to 95. If you project this up today, we're probably, I don't know, around 500% more brain tumors. So yeah, so there's a projection. This is a particularly disturbing one for me because I worked with a laptop on me for a long, long time. Different positions of where the antenna is. Now most laptops, this is a really old chart, most laptops the antenna is kind of all over across the screen. Nevertheless, when I saw this, it kind of freaked me out because I sat for years with a laptop on me. Okay, yeah, Debra's going to talk more about the health issues. What I want to point out is that the World Health Organization has classified electromagnetic radiation as a possible carcinogen. So they haven't come right out and said, yeah, it causes cancer, but it's on the list of things to watch. This is where everything goes before it's on the yes, definitely list. And what do the big companies have to say about this? Well, T-Mobile says that scientific research has not demonstrated any adverse health effects. Right? This is big business, right? And it's not just devices, right? You think about content providers, Netflix, Amazon, YouTube, Google, right? All these companies are making all of their money from people holding devices. So trillions of dollars are invested in us not having this meeting here today. Okay. So we're getting close to the end here. Thanks for bearing with me. So here's a list of some of the symptoms. There's lots of other symptoms that are on this list. One of the biggest things I run into is people not connecting their symptom with wireless. I talk to people almost every week. I talked to a woman last week. She was having dizziness, having trouble sleeping, these issues that certainly could be related to wireless radiation. I'm not a doctor. I don't want to say for sure, but the fact that she's got a cell phone tower down the street and my meter has some pretty high numbers coming in her bedroom would suggest that it's probably worth considering. But most people just aren't connecting those dots, right? I mean, I just thought I had really bad dandruff. And then I realized it's only really bad right around my right ear. I thought I just had a rash for some reason on my hand that wouldn't go away until I realized it was the wireless devices I was holding. So there are a lot of people out there walking around with health issues that aren't being connected. One of the doctors who's part of Safe Tech, who wasn't able to join us today, she's over in Oahu. She's a diagnostician, and so she works to try to figure out what's causing people's illnesses. And her comments in one of our recent meetings was that she's got people coming in every week that have symptoms that she can say with almost certainty, it's probably from wireless. You need to get a meter and go check your environment. So it's an issue because a lot of people are saying, well, I don't feel anything. I haven't felt the effects. And my first response is, maybe you are feeling the effects and you haven't connected them. And two, maybe you haven't gotten to like your saturation point yet. So that's this next slide. And this is kind of how I view it. This is time, and this is the accumulated exposure, right? So over time, you have this accumulation. Maybe you go on vacation and you're out in the jungle for 6 months and your body does some repair, but then you come back to civilization and you have more exposure. And then maybe you take another trip to Antarctica and there's nothing. But eventually, you hit this line. And this is what happened to me, right? I went about 20 years, give or take, and I really had pretty minor symptoms, if any at all, that I recognized. And then I got to this point, and it was just right over the edge. So now I can't leave my house without multiple layers of Faraday gear on my body. I'm roasting right now, by the way, and I don't even have my headgear on and my glasses and my gloves, which all go on as soon as I step out the door. I don't do that by choice. It's not fun. It's 85 degrees out, and it's a lot hotter under all of this fabric. It's expensive. It's uncomfortable. I don't have a choice. My life has been fundamentally changed because of this accumulation effect and where I'm at now up here in the red.
How old are you now?
41, 42, I think. That's the, what is that? The cognitive problems you're hearing.
So you started with a cell phone at age 17?
Yeah, I got a cell phone at 17, but I had a cordless phone when I was like 12.
You were exposed.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about later, is, that's where we're at, how to deal with this problem, right? It's a different situation. If you live right next to a cell phone tower, that's a different fix, and you can do things about that. But it's a heck of a lot easier to do things that are within your control in your own environment. This was my house before I did anything with it. I mean, I was just getting cooked alive in my office. There was nowhere in my house that was essentially safe. Once I figured this out, the other thing to note is you'll notice that the further away the device is from the access point, the higher the number. So counterintuitively, it sounds like, well, I'll just see if I can turn this down a little bit. But when you do that, this turns up. So it's a tricky situation to get this dialed in so that you're not getting roasted. Yes?
If you turn it off, does it make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to come to that. So my house now looks more like that. It's actually better than this. This is old. I've improved it since then because 0.01, I didn't want 0.01. I wanted 0.000 if I could help it, or at least 2 zeros. And I've achieved that now in my office. This is even less. This isn't that hard to do, and it's certainly not expensive to do, right? It requires cables. You don't even have to run the cable anymore. There are little devices that we'll be talking about later that you can just plug in to get internet from one side of your house to the other without any Wi-Fi at all. This stuff's all cheap. It's all easy to implement. And when we come back around, I'm going to be talking about that gear and how you guys can go home and do this yourself. Order this stuff on Amazon. It's pretty easy. Okay, so we're getting down the last couple slides here. This is my router. I've turned my router down to 15% transmit power. Most routers that you get from Spectrum or from the factory, they're going full blast, 100%, right? They don't want people calling and saying, my router's not strong enough, I don't get Wi-Fi in my bedroom. They're just giving it all it's got. And that's why you saw that screen earlier where we could see all the wireless networks. That's why you can see all those wireless networks, because everybody is at 100%. And so you can walk 300 yards down the road and get on the internet. Well, most people don't really need this. It's completely unnecessary. Most people could probably do with this or somewhere down here. Now, every access point, every router, wireless router is different. Some routers don't have this. In fact, the ones from Spectrum don't. The ones from Spectrum that you get that are those big, I call them the Tower of Doom. There's 2 different Towers of Doom that Spectrum issues, and neither one of them has this adjustment, which is a shame, because it means when you plug that in, it's 100%. But a lot of access points, a lot of routers do. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, because maybe you don't need 100%, maybe you can turn it way down. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about how to just plug stuff in. right? I mean, that's the best way is just Ethernet cable, adapter, shielding for phones. We'll talk about Faraday fabric and some other things. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you guys very much.
So good news is these issues can be curbed and curtailed, right? There are solutions here, and that's why we're here today. So as he said, towards the end, they're going to show you guys more of the details of the nuts and bolts. Once again, I'm your host, Ian. I'm happy to be here. I got involved with Safe Tech inadvertently through discovering a tumor in my grandmother's head, which I could not prove was from wireless radiation, but I had a good inkling that it was. Just to recap, you know, I'm from Oahu, Honolulu, Hawaii, and I did start to notice after 2017 I had a kind of awakening. I would consider I was asleep to the issue. I did use my cell phone on my head. I was totally into the whole electronics, you know, consumerism, trying to get the newest, the latest, greatest thing. And now I really am the opposite, and that's part of the reason why I moved out here to the Big Island, because back to what I was saying, when I tried to look into this and look for experts, our next speaker, Dr. Debra Greene, was the only person I could find at the time, and she was the first and only person I could find. She was my introduction into Safe Tech. And so I was lucky enough to speak with her and get some insight on the science behind it and the facts about it and what we can do about it. So that led me here today, but through meeting Debra, I was able to get an even better meter. And I noticed that around Honolulu, there were many, many, many towers popping up overnight, especially during the pandemic. And I even noticed that they were building the towers in the middle of the night. Sometimes they have these crews like putting up these antennas. So thanks to Debra, I got a hold of a meter, and I actually went around my city, or I went around Honolulu, and I just measured the ambient radiation. And to my dismay, everywhere I measured these towers, even when they were on the roofs of apartment buildings or hospitals, what have you, the readings were off the charts. Some of these meters have like alarms on them that beep when it gets too high, and everywhere I went it was, you know. So I had to put it on mute, but it was always redlining everywhere I went. Long story short, there was about 300 or more antennas within a 5-mile radius of where I was living. 300 antennas giving off this huge amount of radiation. So the way I could describe it was I was living in an electric soup, basically. And I was having headaches, just as Ethan was talking about. And I took it upon myself to go out and get precautionary aid. So for example, I have a shirt right here. This is Silver Lines. This is an EMF shirt. And what's that old commercial? I'm not just a member, I'm also a client. I've got that stuff on under my clothes as well. I do wear a beanie as well, because the levels in Oahu were so high. I shared all that data with Debra, and my conclusion was to move away from it. So that's part of the reason why I'm here on the Big Island today, because thank God we're on the Big Island. We can have this meeting, we can talk about this, because although we do have towers out here and it is an issue all over the country, I can assure you that Honolulu is by far way worse. So keep in mind, guys, we're still in a good space, especially if we're out here in Honolulu, out here on the Big Island. It's not as bad. So there is hope. And from there, I want to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Debra Greene earned her PhD from Ohio State University. She's a wellness consultant, author, presenter, and community organizer who founded Safe Tech Hawaii to stop the proliferation of wireless technology in the Hawaiian Islands and to advocate for safe technology. She worked closely with Josh Del Sol and Sayer G on creation of the International 5G Crisis Summit. Debra first wrote about the harmful effects of wireless radiation in her groundbreaking book, Endless Energy. The Essential Guide to Energy Health, which was published in 2009, almost 15 years ago. She works at the Four Seasons Resort on Maui as a wellness consultant, and she is joining us here today via Zoom link. And I'm very thankful to have her here today. So let's give her a round of applause, guys. She's going to speak on this issue, and I'll let Debra take it away from you.
Aloha, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Aloha!
All right. Thanks for being here. And I'm just going to do a screen share because I have some slides. Because when I turn on the slideshow, I can't see you guys, I'm going to ask you to hold your questions. And is there a whiteboard there for folks to write questions on or not? No. Okay. All right. We had talked about that, so I wasn't sure. But all right. Can you see the slides?
Cut off.
All right. So far, so good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, my task is to share with you about the health effects of wireless radiation. And to be honest, I can't possibly cover all of the research and health effects that are available now because it would take way too long. Such is the current state of affairs with wireless radiation exposure. So I'm just going to touch on highlights, perhaps a little bit of repetition from what Ethan shared. And when I finish sharing about the health effects, I hope that the burning question that's going to come to your mind is, why are we not being protected? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and that leads into the creation of Safe Tech Hawaii, which is a grassroots coalition that I founded almost 10 years ago now. All right, so let's just dive right in. Currently, it's safe to say that there are well over 10,000 scientific studies showing harm from wireless radiation from devices, wireless devices, smartphones, smart appliances, cell phones, smart meters, and so forth. And this evidence comes in the form of sick and injured people reporting their electrosensitivity, and also lab experiments that show DNA damage, tumors, damage to cells and organ systems in humans, plants, trees, animals, birds, insects, and bees. Yes, the pollinators also being affected by wireless radiation. So it doesn't just damage human health, it also affects our pets and affects basically all life forms. And there's also a lot of epidemiological evidence that shows cancer, heart damage, and diabetes. So it's not a pretty picture. More specifically, electromagnetic radiation has been linked to everything from brain tumors and dementia and heart problems to reproductive harm, cancers of different varieties, cell damage, and breaching of the blood-brain barrier. This is an image of what happens when an adult person holds a cell phone to their head on the top. And this is a thermography image. And basically the warmer colors of red, orange, and yellow are showing heat, actual heating of the tissue. And so you can see that when you hold a cell phone to your head, you're actually cooking your brain, we could say. The lower image shows what happens when a child holds a cell phone to their head, and you can see that the red and orange areas are much bigger than the adult person. And that's because there's a much greater absorption of the radiation into the brain of children, which is why it's recommended that children not use cell phones, at least not in this manner. And I mean, holding a cell phone next to your head is not safe, even for adults, but this image really depicts the danger to children. Drilling down deeper into the wireless radiation harms, there was a recent study by the US government, National Institutes of Health National Toxicology Program, to the tune of $30 million. and 10 years it took for them to publish their results. And they showed a clear link between wireless radiation exposure and cancer, heart damage, and DNA damage. The World Health Organization, as Ethan mentioned, has categorized wireless radiation as a class 2B possible carcinogen, which puts it in the same category as lead, car exhaust, chloroform, and diesel fuel. Most of us would not willingly expose ourselves to products like this, but we tend to expose ourselves to wireless radiation pretty readily without thinking too much about it. Health experts from over 240 countries have issued a formal warning, and there are several developed countries that have safety provisions that are far more protective than in the US. The United States has some of the most lax health regulations around EMF of any country in the world, which is a very sad state of affairs. And as Ethan mentioned, if you look at the user manual of your cell phone or your laptop or tablet, you will see that it says in order to use the phone safely or the device safely that you have to keep it off of your body at least 1/4 of an inch, and in the case of laptops or tablets, up to 8 inches. And most of us don't read the user manual, unfortunately, but why do they say this? Because could it be that they're covering their bases? When lawsuits are brought, people are asked, did you ever touch the cell phone to your head? Did you ever touch the device to your body? And if someone answers yes, well, then there's no liability. The insurance industry, which is tasked with estimating the impact of various devices and products on the market, has categorized electromagnetic frequencies as a high-impact casualty. What do they know that we don't know? We're also seeing some alarming recent research about harms in young people. If you begin using a cell phone as a teenager or younger, you're 4 to 5 times more likely to develop a brain tumor. We're also seeing alarming increases in breast cancer in young women, and the speculation, of course, is that a lot of young women have a tendency to store their cell phone inside their bra. And we're also seeing an alarming rate in lowered sperm counts in young men. And of course, a lot of guys have a tendency to put the cell phone in their front pants pocket right next to the family jewels. And not only lowered sperm counts, but also a lack of sperm motility, which means the sperm gets extremely confused when it's exposed to wireless radiation. It forgets how to swim. It doesn't swim in the right direction. Sometimes it swims in circles and shows some very, very bizarre behaviors. And a very recent development, which is really disconcerting, is an increase in colorectal cancers in young people. It used to be that colorectal cancer was only found in older people, but now they're finding it in young people at an increasing rate. And of course, it's probably because young people have a tendency to also carry their cell phones in their back pants pocket. There's also mental health issues that are linked with wireless radiation exposure, things such as anxiety, depression, behavioral impairments, attention deficit disorders, and of course addiction, because cell phones and apps are designed to be addictive. They're designed to keep you coming back. This is a chart that shows some research that was done in France, and it shows the neurobehavioral effects of people living in proximity to cell towers being exposed to wireless radiation. And if you just look at the top 5 symptoms, and again, this is showing the more subtle symptoms, right? The neurobehavioral stuff, not so much the physical damage, but what we see is number 1, fatigue, then sleep disturbance, headaches, a feeling of discomfort and difficulty concentrating. And I think if you look around, most people suffer from these types of disturbances. People feel tired for no apparent reason. Many people have a hard time sleeping, falling asleep or staying asleep, headaches, a general feeling of malaise, or having a hard time focusing, the brain fog thing. And as Ethan mentioned, people don't connect the dots. Even though they're experiencing these kinds of symptoms, they don't realize that it's actually coming from wireless radiation. And it's a pretty long list here of 16 different symptoms that people experience by exposure. This piece of research that was done in Germany is really groundbreaking. And what they did, they took 1,000 patients and tracked where these people lived in proximity to cell towers or to transmission masts, as they're called in Europe. And what they found was that the cancer rates were 3 times higher in people who lived in closer proximity to cell towers, and also the patients experienced illnesses on average 8 years earlier than those who were further away from the cell towers. And the distance was within 437 yards. And then we have this anecdotal evidence from California that's documenting cell tower deaths in proximity to a single cell tower. And these are 5 documented premature deaths from people living within 350 feet of a cell tower. So it's not a pretty picture. And I haven't even talked about 5G yet, because 5G, as Ethan mentioned, is going to ramp up all of this. And we're told that 5G is about faster downloads and lower latency, but 5G should actually be called AI IoT, because the purpose of 5G is to usher in artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, where everything in existence on the planet is chipped and radiating and emitting and transmitting wireless radiation 24/7, 365. And that includes everything on the outside and inside of your body as well. Because we already have in existence so-called smart pills that are able to track what's going on inside your body as the medication or pill is being ingested. So let's talk a little bit more about 5G, which is relatively new arrival. It's important to understand that right now, 5G adds onto and does not replace 4G or LTE, or even 3G for that matter. And it involves millimeter wave frequencies, which is a higher part of the spectrum that has never before been used for commercial use. It's only been used in the past by the military for crowd control. These millimeter wave frequencies are more fragile, we could say, in that they don't travel as far and they tend to get easily impeded by things like trees with leaves and moisture in the air and also buildings and things like that. So because these millimeter waves get easily impeded, it means that antennas have to be installed much closer together and also closer to our homes. And that's one of the negative things about 5G is it's going to bring this dangerous infrastructure much closer to us, closer to our homes. And you can end up with 5G antenna as close as 15 feet to your home. Most of the 4G antennas, even if it's beefed up 4G, they're like out in the countryside or they're on top of buildings, but that's changing with the advent of 5G. And 5G also ushers in thousands of new satellites in low orbit, and I'll talk more about those in a moment. But let's drill down into this 5G stuff. 5G base stations and devices contain multiple antennas in phased arrays, and that means they have these steerable laser-like beams that track each other. which means that every 5G enabled phone is kind of like a miniature cell tower that you hold in your hand and hopefully not hold against your brain. Because every 5G enabled phone contains dozens of these tiny antennas that are designed to track and aim these narrowly focused beams that search and connect to the nearest antenna. And the nearest antenna might be in another 5G phone. You know, it's somebody that walks by you if you're out on the street, or it could be, you know, a smart device or an appliance inside your home, or it could be an antenna. The FCC, in their infinite wisdom, has ruled that 5G can operate at 20 watts, which is 10 times more powerful than 4G. So we're talking about radiation that's 10 to hundreds of times greater than what we've had. And then we have the recent OTAR ruling, which happened a couple of years ago. And with this ruling, your neighbor can install 5G antennas on their property, get paid by the telecommunication companies for doing that, and there's nothing you can do about it. Not a pretty picture. What about the 5G satellites? Well, Elon Musk's Starlink has over 1,500 Starlink satellites already in low orbit, with 42,000 planned. OneWeb, which is a European company, has 182 5G satellites with 48,000 planned. And add on to that, Facebook and Amazon have plans for 5G satellites. And when you add it all together, the plans are for over 100,000 new satellites. That's in addition to all the satellites that are already up there. So eventually, if this plan goes forward, every inch of planet Earth will be bathed in radiation 24/7, 365. And oh, by the way, that also includes the ocean, because plans are underway developing the Internet of Ocean Things, or the Internet of Underwater Things, where underneath the ocean there will be sonar that communicates wireless signals. So it's not a pretty picture. The problem is, as Ethan mentioned, because wireless is everywhere, we can't see it, we can't hear it, we can't taste it, we can't smell it, most people can't feel it, so we have a tendency to think it must be safe. And because it's everywhere, we think it has to be safe, because certainly if something was wrong with it, the authorities would not be allowed to put this on the market, right? Or if everything that I've just told you is true, if in fact these wireless devices are not safe, why aren't we being protected? Well, the answer to that reflects back again on what Ethan said, which has become known as the tobacco playbook, because the tobacco companies, in order to be as successful as they were, they had a strategy in place. And that strategy, now referred to as the tobacco playbook, is being replicated certainly by big telecom and by other industries as well. So the tobacco playbook goes like this. Step number 1, create a highly addictive product. Just like Big Tobacco knew that nicotine was addictive, knew that cigarettes were addictive, people in big tech and big telecom know that cell phones and their various apps are addictive. Step number 2 is hide the relevant research that shows harm. So try to suppress it as best you can, and the ways you can do that are by paying off researchers so that they don't publish their research if it shows harm. And if some research does happen to come out that shows harm, you focus on discrediting the researchers so that nobody will believe them anyway, so that they lack credibility. And then you pour on the propaganda to the public and convince everyone that DDT is good for me. Convince everyone that smoking is good for you. Convince, which, by the way, I am probably dating myself, but I can tell you I'm old enough to remember, for example, that the first time I flew on an airplane when I was 8 years old, the meal tray that came, every single meal tray on the airplane had on it a little packet of cigarettes. And I, as an 8-year-old child, was served, along with my meal, a packet of cigarettes. They were giving the things away like candy. And that's what they're doing now with cell phones, marketing them to children and so forth. And it's really very, very sad. I also remember that my best friend's mother was told by her physician that she should smoke cigarettes during her pregnancy because it would help with the pregnancy. So pour on the propaganda to the public and convince everyone that you have to have this product in order to be safe. You have to have a cell phone in order to be safe. You have to have a cell phone in order to connect with people. You have to have a cell phone in order to live a fulfilling and productive life. And last but not least, you take over the regulating agencies. Now, Big Tobacco was very good at the first 5 of these steps, but they did not know so much about taking over the regulating agencies. That is something that Big Telecom and Big Tech have mastered. In fact, there's even an entire report written about this by the Harvard Ethics Committee, and the report is called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries that it's supposed to be regulating. And when you capture regulatory agencies, the FCC is tasked with protecting us. That is their job, and they are not doing it because they have been overtaken by industry. Also, these corporations are well aware of this time lag effect. Whenever a new technology or product comes onto the market, there's a time lag between its release to consumers and any scientific research that can be done on it, because you can't really know the effect of something on masses of people until you release it to the public. And then there's another time lag that happens before enough legitimate research can be amassed, and then government regulation can be enacted. So the time lag situation is a big problem, and when you factor in that Big Telecom and Big Tech have captured and taken over the governing agencies, that government regulation almost never happens. And that's the current state of affairs with wireless radiation, and there are many examples of this, because there's a lot of money to be made in that time lag, and corporations are extremely aware of this. The most recent examples, of course, being opioids and vaping. When it comes to wireless radiation, there are many factors involved in the health effects. It is a complex picture. You have to factor in pulsation, frequencies, power, waveforms, amplitude, modulation, transmission, densification, distance, the list goes on and on. And the truth is that most of these factors are not taken into account when determining the safety levels of wireless radiation exposure. Instead, what we have is SAM. Meet SAM. This is SAM. SAM is basically a large plastic head about the size of a bowling ball, and SAM's head is filled with fluid, and SAM is meant to replicate a 220-pound male military recruit. SAM, by the way, stands for Standard Anthropomorphic Male. Sam is meant to represent all of us. As you can see, he does not resemble any of us because we are not made of plastic. We do not have fluid-filled heads. Sam doesn't have any hands or arms. And he has some very strange habits. For example, Sam only uses his cell phone approximately 7 minutes at a time. Most cell phone users, do not limit themselves to 6 or 7 minutes like Sam does. The other interesting thing about Sam is that, I hope you can see it on the slide image, but there is a spacer placed in between the cell phone and Sam's head. And that spacer is there to represent Sam's enormous ear. So why his ear has to extend down to his cheekbone, I have no idea. But this is the way that cell phone radiation is tested, and the result is determined as to whether the fluid inside Sam's head begins to heat up. So part of the big problem in determining the safety or not of wireless radiation is that they only look at heat effects, as if we are a piece of meat cooking in a microwave oven. And I assure you that you are very different than a piece of meat. And all of the previous factors that I mentioned do not get addressed in this kind of a picture. So the good news is that there have been multiple lawsuits filed against the FCC because they're not doing their job. And I don't have time to talk about all of them. I'm just going to focus on the big one, which is a lawsuit that was filed by the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense. And they sued the FCC because, as Ethan mentioned earlier, the FCC has not updated their wireless radiation safety guidelines since 1996. Did anyone even own a cell phone in 1996? Certainly there was no Wi-Fi in 1996, and no smartphones, and no smart devices, and no plethora of wireless exposure like we have right now. The other thing about the research from 1996 is that most of that research was based on studies that were done in the 1980s. So it's a very inaccurate picture of our current situation. So because the FCC ruled that, we can just still withhold our 1996 safety guidelines, they were sued, and 11,000 pages of evidence of harm to humans and the environment were submitted in this lawsuit. And the FCC responded to the 11,000 pages of evidence of harm by saying there's no evidence of harm. So there was an appeal filed, and I'm happy to say that the judge ruled against the FCC, and so now the FCC is forced to look at the evidence. And we can only hope that that will happen quickly, and that they will be forced to reevaluate and reissue the safety guidelines so that they actually reflect the current situation of exposure, and that they are actually protective, because what we have right now is ridiculous. And for that reason, I founded, almost 10 years ago now, Safe Tech Hawaii. And the truth is that when it comes to protection, a lot of the protective legislation can happen at the local level. So there are things happening at the federal and state levels, and there are also things happening actually in other countries for sure. But when it comes to the US, a lot can be achieved at the local level, and in Hawaii, that means at the level of the county. So when I first founded Safe Tech Hawaii, we were actually called keepyourpower.org, and at the time we were focused on smart meters. because Hawaiian Electric wanted to roll out smart meters, and I knew they were harmful. And on the island of Maui, they actually targeted my neighborhood as a pilot project, and so I realized that I had to do something. And over the years, we have had quite a few successes. The next speaker, Naomi, she's the Big Island leader. She'll be talking more in depth about some of our efforts and successes. But in terms of smart meters, we did engage in filing a notice of liability process. And it was quite a process, but we did have success, and we've been able to keep smart meters at bay for quite a few years. And now a rollout has started, and I guess I would like to think that it was because of our efforts that you actually have the option to opt out, because we were extremely active in getting that opt-out included. And we had to fight for it, but we do have it now, which is good. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and turn it over to Ian to introduce what's next. Thank you again.
Thank you, Debra. All right, guys. So that was Debra. I had the opportunity to actually talk to Debra back in, I think it was 2019. As I said before, I'm your host, Ian. That's how I got involved with Safe Tech. I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii. I noticed the area that I was living in was basically filled with Wi-Fi radiation, and I did have insomnia, I did have migraines, I did see health effects. I did notice an overall change in the attitude of the people of the city, and I often wondered, do they understand what's happening to them or not? I just didn't see a lot of awareness. So I'm really happy to be here today, because that's what we're doing, right, is awareness. So what we need first is awareness, and then we give you the resolution and the solutions here today. So there is hope. I did move away from Honolulu to come to the Big Island because the radiation is a lot less out here. I'm really, inspired to get back into nature. And I am happy, I'm healthy, I'm spiritually wealthy, so I know that these issues are serious, and they have good reason to cause alarm within you when you hear about this, but I'm here to say that we can fix it. We can be okay through this. I'm glad that Debra did mention something that a lot of people don't talk about, but she mentioned AI and the military. And this is a newspaper right here, local newspaper, right here on the Big Island from about a week ago. And the reason why I bought it, I don't usually buy the newspaper or care about the newspaper, but I bought this because it says AI spurs election worries. And it was the first time that I had ever seen AI headlined in a local newspaper out here in Hawaii. I've never heard the news media mention AI on the front page of a newspaper before, but I'm so glad that Debra brought that up and correlated it with 5G, because all of you today can go home at your own leisure and you guys can Google 5G and AI, and you will see that AI is being trained to use the 5G network and use it for the connectivity. So there definitely is a connection here with our whole infrastructure, 5G wireless radiation, and the technology that's being released on us today. In Honolulu, there's a lot of smart lights being installed, traffic lights with microphones, and I noticed these little trash can sized robots that look like R2-D2 from Star Wars. They're patrolling around in downtown Honolulu, driving around the bank, like the security guard. The Honolulu Police Department during the COVID pandemic purchased robot dogs with the CARES money, with the COVID money. They bought robot dogs, and they used these robot dogs to assist the police and identify homeless people and so on and so forth. So the wireless radiation and the infrastructure with these antennas is integral to a lot of the technology that's being rolled out. And so that's something that I think is good to be aware of as to why this is happening. Because a lot of people wonder, well, if it's for the internet, but it has side effects, maybe there's some justification there. But yeah, it definitely is being pushed full steam ahead because there's a lot of money and there's a lot of technology that relies on this 5G, particularly AI. A lot of people don't know what AI is yet, don't understand AI or 5G. You know, when I talk to people, they either don't know what I'm talking about, they're confused, they don't care, or they think I'm nuts. So I'm so glad we can have our speakers here today, which are professionals. They can give you the facts and they can give you the science behind it with their PowerPoints and share their expertise and knowledge about these issues here today. So I'm really appreciated that they're here speaking to us today. And so stick around. I'm just going to reiterate, we have a couple more speakers. They will be helping you. We have some giveaways, and we can get into the nuts and bolts of this, and there will be a Q&A panel afterwards. We are filming this. You can review the video later. But I want to introduce my next speaker, or our next speaker rather, and her name is Naomi Melamed. Naomi is the Big Island leader of Safe Tech Hawaii. She brought a successful resolution to the Hawaii County Council to actually halt the build out of 5G. She consults individuals and businesses, mitigates EMF, and educates through outreach about safer technology. She has lived in North Kohala for the last decade, where she stewards a community and farm which is totally hardwired EMF safe zone. So let's welcome Naomi up to the center stage. She speaks to us today.
Yeah, I do actually. Aloha, everyone. Thank you for all of your attention today, listening to us. And as Ethan said, it's not necessarily the funnest topic, but I really appreciate Ian's perspective just now that there is a lot that we can do. And as Debra said, it lies on the local level. So I'm here to just tell a little bit about Safe Tech Hawaii. We had a little bit of a technical thing, so I'm not going to be using my PowerPoint, unfortunately, but I'm so happy to have Ethan here as the technical, liaison, because as much as I've used technology in my life, and I'll share more about my personal story, it's not necessarily my primary forte. My background is actually in education, and I've worked in the healthcare field. I've been on the Big Island for a little over a decade, and I've primarily worked assisting home birth and working pregnancy, postpartum, and intrapartum. And I'd like to share a little bit about my personal story. Actually, also through the work field, I maintained a really high level of EMF exposure. And over time, I started to realize that an on-call lifestyle paired with living somewhat off-grid, as Ian mentioned, in our community, many people who are on the Big Island, we're somewhat rural, and people don't realize that they have options because they think, oh, I just need to get something from a satellite, or I need to make a hotspot on, my device in order to get connectivity. So I was in that, field. I had to have a booster for my cell phone to work on all the time, Wi-Fi, phone next to me when I sleep to be on call, and little by little, I also started to get effects. My effects were mainly neurological, so I would have shaking issues, which was really strange. Some people refer to it as restless legs, but it was kind of all over my body. And at the time that I started developing symptoms, I was pregnant as well. So I thought, oh, it's maybe just like typical pregnancy stuff, but it didn't go away. And actually migraines increased and headaches, and I started to realize that something was really off, especially after having my child and my symptoms. So I started working with Debra after realizing that wow, I'm really being affected by this and totally turning my life around as well, I actually had to go away from my career. I wasn't able to be on call anymore. I wasn't able to have that kind of device or be exposed at those levels in the home. So I'm somewhat grateful for that, you know, just because now it's brought me to a new place where I can work with this wonderful group and help raise awareness. And you know, as much as I miss my old lifestyle of being able to not be that person who asks everybody to turn off their cell phone if I'm at a meeting, or, you know, can you turn off your Wi-Fi, or all these things, but I appreciate this kind of a gathering because it creates a culture around this, and I think that that's something that from a grassroots level is also very important for us to have that kind of dialogue going. So I want to talk a little bit about when I first met Debra, and some of you were supporters of Resolution 678-20, you know, the Hawaii County resolutions all have their particular numbers, but basically what it was a resolution to ask the telecommunications companies to cease the build out of 5G on the Big Island until proper studies have been conducted to show safety in terms of human health and environmental health and wellness. So that was passed back 2018, 2019. It was a big process and a huge win and victory for the Big Island. Despite the fact that a resolution doesn't actually have the, as they say, teeth of law, it was a strong statement from Hawaii County, and it's something that we're building on. So we've done a lot of legislative efforts. We've worked to get wireless out of the schools, out of parks. We've worked to introduce the cell phone right to know, so that at the point of sale, that little thing that Ethan talked about, which is at the back of the book when you buy your cell phone, that should be at the front counter when people are purchasing phones, that people should know, you know, this is potentially dangerous, and if you hold it up to your ear, you know, it's exceeding the FCC limits for exposure.
Excuse me, did you say you got Wi-Fi out of schools?
We worked to do that, and although we weren't successful, it was something that our organization, you know, our group is still working on, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well, and what we have to offer moving forward. And so we have a resistance movement that's building, and I have back there a sign-up sheet. I think everybody signed on it, and that basically will sign you up to Safe Tech Hawaii, to our petitions. We have actually 3 petitions on there. Debra talked about the smart meters, 5G, and as well as we have a no 4G, 5G drones petition, which is a project that went on the island of Lanai. They were trying to put up these giant football field sized drones to radiate 5G down on all of the islands and beyond, actually, as a launching site for the world. So this particular project was delayed, and we like to think because of the resistance and our efforts, we put a lot of pressure on that project, and so it's been a few years now that it's ceased, and they've had a lot of hiccups as well. Is this okay? Great. Where is it now? Okay. So another thing that we have here, if you haven't gone to our website, I really encourage you, safetechhawaii.com. One of the things Ian actually mentioned, he was one of our meter reading, volunteers. We're all volunteer, actually, so a little hit that we appreciate your support and donations. We have a donation button as well. But this is a testing project, the EMF testing project, that we went around to as many meters as we were able, and I'm celebrating here with you all to say that on the Big Island, we've documented every single antenna that exists on this island. So in many countries, in Europe, I know there are several countries where the companies and their regulating agency, similar to the FCC, actually does document the radiation that these towers are putting out, but there's no such thing in the United States. So we took it upon ourselves to do this and dedicate it to the many people who don't have a choice, of whether they want to, where they want to live. They have to choose in this way and avoid and choose a place that doesn't have, a cell tower, or at least one that emits close by. So this is the Big Island, and you can see through, go through all of the addresses and the locations, city locations, as well as how many megawatts per square meter of radiation are coming off of those towers. So I hope that that's helpful for everybody to know, and please share that information if you know anybody. It's on the website, safetechhawaii.com. And we have our cards in the back as well, so everybody, grab a little stack, and feel free to pass them out. Another thing that we've done, we've actually done 2 terms now of a voter's guide, where our amazing volunteers, we call them phone angels, have personally called each candidate, many of them 3 times, the major candidates, and we've come up with a comprehensive list of the candidates' stance on 5G, which could also be interpreted as their stance with big business, big industry, and many other things that could help with legislative efforts. And yeah, you're welcome. So we've gone through each of the positions, and if you go to our website, you can see the current, these are all current, many of them are in office now, and we hope to be able to do that again in the next election term. So let's see here, our wireless safety course is the last thing that I'd like to talk about, which is a free bonus for everybody who's here and for all of the residents of Hawaii for a limited time until July 31st. We have teamed up with wirelesseducation.org, and we've created this, it's called a wireless education mini course. It targets the home, families, and schools, and it's a 20 to 30 minute program that you can go through and take, and it will cover much of what Ethan will be discussing after our talks, but just how to protect yourself, how to wire your home, some of the science. It's not overwhelming for people. It's just a 20-30 minute commitment, but it really does cover a lot of the bases, and we're trying our best to put that, into teachers' hands, students' hands, families' hands, and just continue to grow this awareness. So we have on our website for this limited time until July 31st, we have this registration link, and you can use it to log in and sign up and do your 30-minute safety course and receive your certificate of completion, and we hope everybody takes advantage of that. So yeah. A wireless safety course. Yeah, so these are all of our tabs, and I want to keep my talk brief, so I'm not going to go through all of the tabs. Thank you guys for bearing with me for the technical delay aspect too. But yeah, that is the majority of what I wanted to discuss today. And as a little pick-me-up at the end, I want to just do a little pop quiz for everyone. I brought with me a couple of goodies, a few goodies that I would like to ask some questions, and if anybody has the answer, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll see. So the first question that I want to ask is, why is a cell phone more harmful for a child than for an adult?
Because of the mass of their head.
Mass of their head? And
because their brain's not fully formed.
And their brain's not fully formed? I would say the skull is thinner. Yeah, I would say that that's the most That's the biggest reason why. All of those reasons are valid reasons as well, but there is just not that level of protection there for them that bone offers. Okay, so another question that I would like to ask is, when is your cell phone the most dangerous? When does it radiate the most? Yeah, in what types of conditions does a cell phone have the highest levels of radiation that it emits? Oh, I didn't know. Yeah.
When there's not a signal to
Nice, all right, great. Those are my 2 prizes, so thank you. Yeah, thank you guys very much for listening. Our next speaker is going to be Sarah, but I'll give it up to Ian.
Thank you, Naomi. Again, guys, big aloha and mahalo for coming out today. We're almost through with our speakers. We've got one last speaker, which is Sarah Mudrick. And she is an educator, so she's going to go into the aspects of how this technology affects education and children, because you know the children are what's important. As our previous speaker said, they're the children are the ones that are really going to grow up into this and have to deal with this. And again, guys, I want to bring hope here. That's what we're here about. It's awareness and hope. So as your host, I can personally testify that although I did have health effects and I did have you know, such things as insomnia and headaches and other issues with wireless radiation and this type of technology while living in Honolulu, I did decide to make the move, and I did take precautionary measures. I got a meter for myself, and I did invest. It's not a commercial, but I did invest in some EMF protective clothing, which anyone can go online and buy. I got mine from a website called lambs.com. You can buy a hat, you can buy a shirt, you can buy underwear. I like to protect like my cranium and my, you know, my skull. Well, they've got different colors, but you know, my spinal cord. So I've got the underwear, I've got my special underwear, I've got my special shirt, and I sometimes wear a hat, and it does help. It definitely makes me feel better. You know, funny enough, when I was in Oahu, it's so strong. And I did tests as well with my my wireless antenna for my internet. I would put like my beanie and my clothing, and then I'd get my meter and I'd actually see if it works. And it actually works. So you can do it as well. Ethan talked about Faraday cages, and they can go more into the tips of how to stay safe, but there's purses, there's all kinds of materials. A lot of them are woven with silver, but they do block EMF so that you can carry your cell phone on you. I keep my cell phone off, and I'm trying to create a lifestyle where I don't really need a cell phone. But there are ways to shield against it. And coming out here on the Big Island, I'm so glad that Naomi helped that resolution, because that made me feel better. Because they're building those things on Oahu like there's no tomorrow. I mean, they're just roboticizing that whole island. It's like a little smart city over there. So I'm so glad to hear that the Big Island is kind of putting a halt on it until further research can be done about it. And that to me is just one of the many things why I have hope. And please stick around to the end after Sarah's done talking, because like I said, we're gonna have a Q&A panel up here for all of our speakers. And I did live differently. I did one little tip I did personally too, as well as I stopped wearing a lot of metal, because metal does conduct you know, electricity. You make yourself into an antenna. So little things like that. The other experts and speakers can go over that stuff with you guys. Please stick around. I'm also happy, thank you Naomi, for doing the voter guide. That was really important to this, what we're doing here today, because me personally, after experiencing what I've experienced, I would never vote for a candidate who was promoting 5G. I would vote for the person that is more, you know, how do you say, cares more about the 5G issue, that will look into the wireless radiation. Personally, I would vote for that person. That's just my preference, but that's just one way here, guys, that we can all, you know, do our part and help to make this a better environment with less radiation, because we can do it with voting. It's one way. Other than that, guys, let me introduce our last speaker. And her name is Sarah Mudrick. Sarah Mudrick earned her Master's of Science degree from in Education. Excuse me, that's right. Sarah Mudrick earned her Master's of Science in Education from Johns Hopkins School of Education and has been teaching in Hawaii for 5 years. She was born and raised in Honolulu, just like I was, and she is passionate about cultivating local leadership and empowering students in Hawaii. She joined SafeTech in 2021 and has created a unit to educate students on wireless radiation and engage them in local advocacy, writing to their county council members to stop the proliferation of towers near homes and schools. So Sarah was actually able to get all her students to write to her local county members about this issue. She has engaged students from middle to high school in this unit and is passionate about getting students to unplug and realize the addictive nature of their tech reliance. So let's welcome Sarah to the stage.
Quick question, was that Lambs, L-A-M-B?
Yes, correct. They're not sponsoring us or anything?
No.
But
No,
yeah.
I looked on their site, so they don't have white pants.
Yeah, they don't have a lot, but there are other companies, and I do know of somebody like that Debra was connected to, that people actually get their own material and then sew their own clothing. Yeah, yeah. So we can talk about it at the end, but I'll give it to Sarah.
All right, thank you. All right, and this works by just going next. All right, awesome. So as Ian introduced me, I am an educator. I teach English to grades right now 9, 10, 11, 12, but I've also taught middle school, 7th and 8th as well. So I've titled this presentation, Zapped, Examining Classrooms and Students in the Digital Age. So what I'd like to cover today is my introduction to this issue. It's a little bit different than all our previous speakers. I'd also like to talk about kids these days, what the internet does to our brains, and also share what some schools are doing around the world in the United States as well to address this issue. And lastly, share my unit that I created that I've run with students 7th through 12th grade. Awesome. So my introduction. Well, I was in 8th grade in 2010. And in 2018, I was back in the classroom, but this time I was teaching 8th grade. And I figured, how different could it be, really? I was here less than 10 years ago, but I was definitely in for a shock. So one of the big things that woke me up to this issue was 8th graders throwing full-on tantrums if I took their phone because they weren't concentrating, weren't paying attention, like talking elementary level, like crying, like screaming, like can barely get their words out, like angry. And I was just so shocked, like could barely speak. So that was the first huge moment that I was like, something is different with these kids than was 10 years ago when I was in this same position. The next thing I noticed was students just trying to live stream anything, literally anything. Like, well, we're watching a movie in class and they just want to live stream their face, right? Not even the movie, just their face, just their reaction. And that was just mind-blowing for me. On the those are more non-academic side, but on the more academic side, I also experienced a huge shift in what I felt I should be able to expect of my students. Even just remembering things from day to day. Like we literally covered this yesterday. At first I thought maybe it's just me, English is not always the most exciting, they're just bored or something. But that was my first year teaching, so as I continued on in the profession, spoke to my principals. While I was working at my first school, we had like a swap, so the high school vice principal swapped with our principal. And even from the high school, they're saying they're noticing the same issue from year to year, that students are just not remembering things from year to year. huge systemic issue, even starting in elementary. And essentially, at my school, 7th and 8th grade English was almost exactly the same. Like, all the topics were the same. And still yet, when my 8th graders were coming to my classroom, it's like they never heard of those things before. So, another huge shift that I was noticing was extreme high levels of self-reported depression, anxiety. One student in particular that I really struggled with would just refuse to do anything remotely close to sharing with the class. Just like, even a sentence, like, what did you do today? No. And her mother supported this, her not developing any public speaking skill because of her anxiety, which I thought was such a shame. And eventually, I came to realize that even though I was only in school 10 years ago, the landscape of academics has completely shifted. There's no homework anymore. I'm a high school teacher, and I can tell you, you can graduate high school now never having done an assignment outside of the classroom. And there's lots of opinions on homework, and we're not going to get into that, but that is one of the huge things that I've noticed. Class periods are getting shorter and shorter. I teach high school, and my periods are only 46 minutes, which seems impossibly short. There are no notes, there are no binders, there's nothing to even write anything down. Students don't know how to take notes. Everything is 100% now on the Chromebooks, on the iPads. And it is such a constant battle to get these kids to put their phones away, take out the AirPods. Even when my school has recently kind of beefed up about this issue, we're just so sneaky, like putting the hoods up, putting the hair, just any way to get that music in, like so distractible. All right, and worst of all, I would say, is expecting students even as young as preschool to be adept on the iPad, turning in their work via a picture instead of, the hard copy, especially during the pandemic. That was such a shift. And in particular, my concern is often using the iPad as a reward. So especially with students that can be, a bit more challenging, this is oftentimes part of their behavioral plan, is that if they do what they're supposed to do, then they get their iPad time. So we are reinforcing this already highly addictive technology even more so. As you know, we've stopped teaching cursive to make time for more technical education. This is not reduced at all. And part of this reasoning, really disturbingly, is also a push from our tech companies, right, to provide that access to get those computers, iPads, whatever have you, into the classroom to so-called make themselves look good, provide that access, that kind of thing. So this led me down my own rabbit hole, trying to figure out what happened. Like, I really wasn't in school that long ago. I would share these things with my parents, and my parents would say, well, every generation, says that about the last. And I would say, but what if it's true, right? What if it's true that every generation we are getting more distracted, more forgetful, less committed, more immature? Where does this leave us in the 2020s, right? So are these kids really that different? I saw this wonderful Time magazine cover to really demonstrate that. And now before I answer this, I want to fully acknowledge that many people in this group might put me into this generation, right, that I'm talking about. I was born in 1996. A lot of the research that I'm going to cover is by Dr. Jean Twenge, and she titles this generation Gen Z, or iGen, the internet generation, and she starts that line at 1995. So technically, I would fall into this category based on her description. However, generational lines are more of a gradation than a solid line. And while I do associate with some of the Gen Z character traits, I also do associate with a lot of millennial character traits. And I would say that there is enough of a generational divide where some of the differences between myself and my students are hard for me to reconcile. So I'm coming at this explanation from this space, acknowledging that I am part of these generation as well. but although we are so close in age, generations are actually getting shorter. So whereas before we measured generations for about a marker of 25 years, now we're looking at more 15 years. So take that for what you will. So how many of you have young people my age or younger in your life?
How old are you?
I'm 27. I just turned 27 last week. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so hopefully some of what I will share is either validating for you, or if it's not, you can give yourself a pat on the back that your young people are not like this. All right, so short answer, yes. Our young people are markedly different in many ways, and I'd like to talk about a few of them. And the research I'd like to focus on is by Dr. Jean Twenge. She's published multiple books. She studies generations. And as I mentioned, she terms this generation Gen Z iGen, so I'll use that interchangeably, but basically my age. And goes into the expected traits that we can expect using longitudinal studies, which allows us to compare generations across time, meaning I can look at an 18-year-old in 1980 and compare that to an 18-year-old today. All right, so nearly all of her conclusions tie back to one central theme: the effects of living your entire life through your phone. And I, among others, would like to argue on top of this that these generational markers can also be tied back to EMF exposure. All right, so Exhibit 1. You might have remembered this in the news, but around 2015, 2016, there was a huge blow up of all these phones exploding. The main one I remember was in the airplane, but another one that made the news that I guess I missed at the time was blowing up in children's beds, particularly when they had been sleeping with them underneath their pillow and waking up to it being on fire, right? So the bedmate of our Gen Z, the first bedmate, is these phones, right? They willingly admit to sleeping with their phones, if not underneath their pillow, in their bed. The farthest is just arm's reach away. Maybe they'll put it on their bedside table, but because the first thing that they do when they wake up in the morning is reach for that phone, and as they're falling asleep, they're also scrolling social media, the internet, what have you. And also if they wake up in the middle of the night, they'll likely check their phone to get them back to sleep. And young people, my students included, describe these behaviors similarly to how an addict would, right? Like, I know I shouldn't do it, but I just can't help it, right? So kids these days, what's happening with them? This is the book that I've been referencing, and the generational shifts that I'm about to present to you are across all economic and ethnic groups, regardless of gender, religion, and the type of town in which the respondents grew up. And that's especially significant because iGen, representing 24% of the country's population, is the most ethnically diverse generation in history. So the title of this book is iGen: Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. These kids have never known a time before the internet. So that's something I like to start with, is like, I'm older than the internet sometimes when I'm getting to know them. Dr. Twenge describes their development using a sociological term, growing up slowly. So this is where people will have one child and spend a lot of time nurturing them rather than have many children and having more of a focus on like getting through the day and surviving with their pack. This slows the maturation process, and Dr. Twenge has posited that we can think of it as a difference of 3 years. So meaning today is graduating 18-year-olds, my seniors just graduated yesterday, and I love them to death, but I have to say, I do agree that much of their maturity level is that more of a 15-year-old than an 18-year-old. One of the key themes that Twenge returns to again and again is their obsession with safety. So Gen Z is risk averse and less likely to engage with risky behaviors. So now you might think, isn't that a good thing? And I would argue yes, but the reason behind it, I would say, is not good. Rather than truly being concerned for safety in the purest sense, the reason I feel this generation is so concerned with safety is due to the fact that everything is mediated through their phone. Before they ever experience something in real life, they'll likely Google it, watch a few videos or TikToks about it, listen to an influencer about it, read some reviews maybe, and then maybe try it in real life, right? Learn from other people's mistakes or faux pas. Not only is Gen Z risk averse, but they also actively fear adulthood and make statements about wanting to revert, right? You might have heard of the term adulting, right? Adulting sucks. But this is quite a reversal of what we've seen in previous generations where kids just can't wait to grow up, right? As a result, we can see with this longitudinal data that I generalize more heavily on their parents until they are much older than previous generations. They date and have sex at older ages. They get driver's licenses later, usually only after their parents refuse to drive them around for any longer. And they get their first jobs later. Again, the term growing up slowly. Twenge also shares that more so than previous generations, iGen exhibits higher levels of individualistic values and beliefs. And again, I would say mediated through the phone, right? Also, as a side note, teen pregnancy is at an all-time low. And again, date and have sex later, but also, as Debra mentioned earlier, perhaps in some part, we are seeing the effects of lowered sperm count and less motility as well. So, while others might present it as a symptom, I present this as the cause to all the behaviors I just covered, that the fact that all the experiences of these young people are mediated through social media and the internet rather than a person. And as a result, this generation is often lonely and sad and participate less in activities that are proven to reduce depression, like spending time with other people, spending time outside. They're also tired. I hope we all remember fatigue is one of the effects of EMFs, right? But beyond just being physically tired, just emotionally tired, like very over it, I would say. It doesn't seem like anything really matters. School doesn't really matter. They are hyper aware of the abysmal state of the world, and it all just weighs on them, I would say. So, how much time are they really spending online? Dr. Twenge terms this new media. So new media is texting, being on your phone, being on the internet, playing video games, all this type of stuff like after the TV, right? So this graph shows how many hours a day a young person would engage with each of these activities. So to truly get a picture, we should add all these numbers. And thankfully, Dr. Twenge has already done that, the math for me, and posits that the average iGener spends between 5 to 6 hours a day on new media. So factoring in all the other things that you need to be a person, like go to school, sleep, all of that, this is essentially 100% of their leisure time, right? They are not spending time in any of the other ways that previous generations did. This does not include TV watching, but another generational shift is that TV watching is kind of in the background now. It's just like background noise that students or children are most likely multitasking, so that's not really their center of attention. And if we factor in TV, it would add up to over 24 hours in a day. So that's really why. All right, and again, I didn't mention this book was published pre-pandemic, so I would assume these numbers are only higher now. This holds true across gender, race, or socioeconomic background, which is what this graph shows. And while girls tend to gravitate more towards social media, boys will opt to spend nearly the same amount of time, if not more, on video games. although the time spent playing video games by girls is also increasing. So that's a lot of time each day to spend on your phone. So what are they doing less of? And essentially the answer is everything that we used to do to communicate and entertain ourselves. So as I mentioned, kids spend less time with their friends in person. They're less likely to go to parties or be unsupervised at the mall or in other activities with their friends. They're more likely to invite their parents. They're less likely to go on dates or even talk to friends face-to-face at school rather than mediate that friend interaction through their phone, like look what's on my TikTok type of deal. They go outside less. They are getting less exercise. There's been, I'm an ELA teacher one more time, there's been a tremendous decline in reading for pleasure, whereas the majority of teens in the 70s read for pleasure. In 2015, that number is at 16%, saying that they've read one book in the past year for pleasure. And again, I'm sure it's even lower now. So beyond reading for pleasure, Gen Z is less likely to read, period. Whether it's assigned for school or not, as a high school teacher, I can attest to this. I read aloud books to my high schoolers to get them to read it. And in Twinnie's book, she also cites college level students not reading their required texts simply due to not having that reading practice when they enter college and they just can't handle it. Some might argue that, well, we put a lot of pressure on kids these days. They're probably preparing for their college or whatever, right? But actually they are doing less homework and less extracurricular activities. And here in Hawaii, I can 100% guarantee you that is far less homework than as little as 10 years ago. And like I said earlier, you can fully graduate high school without ever doing work outside of class if you apply yourself. All right. Others might also think that this generation, very individualistic, also materialistic. Maybe they want to get jobs, right? They want to work after school, they want to get that money, but that's also not the case. Whereas previous generations might have got a summer job or an after-school job, we're seeing far less of that, and even far less even wanting to get a summertime job. And again, as I mentioned earlier, iGen is less likely to want to drive and get a driver's license right at 16, making the classic teen trope of spending time driving around essentially obsolete. So what's the result? Teens are lonelier, more depressed, more anxious than previous generations, as you can see in this graph, with an all-time high. Again, this is pre-pandemic levels because that's just where our research is at. With satisfaction, this one is I feel lonely and left out with an all-time high in 2015. And this is satisfaction with yourself and your life as a whole hitting an all-time low in 2014. And the key year here that I tend to look at is 2012. So 2012 was the year that a lot of social media became available on smartphones, and by this time, the majority of Americans already had a smartphone. All right, sadly, statistics that are really hard to argue with is suicide rates, which are clear markers of worsening mental health. And here we can see a dramatic uptick right at that year I mentioned, 2012, in adolescent suicide, self-poisoning, major depressive episodes, and depressive symptoms right here at that 2012 mark. All right, so there are no shortage of articles discussing all of these reasons that I've previously mentioned for why American teens are so sad. Social media, lack of in-person socializing, the stressors of the modern world, and modern parenting also tending towards coddling. Another great book worth checking out is called The Coddling of the American Mind. I highly recommend it. It talks about a lot of the same things I'm covering right now. But few in the mainstream have questioned the link between EMFs and the health effect on teens. So thankfully, some are now putting this together. And their reputable research can be found online a lot easier than it was even a few years ago. And this one I'm citing here, Dr. Paul, shares the number of studies that have correlated neuropsychiatric symptoms with appearing following EMF exposure. And again, this list lines up eerily well with all these generational traits that I've just mentioned, including depression, trouble with concentration, attention, and memory changes. All right, so to recap real quick, we know that psychologically and on the mental health side, phones and social media have a negative effect on youth. I hope we can now all agree that health-wise, EMF exposure is linked to multiple neuropsychiatric effects as well as the myriad of diseases that Debra mentioned earlier today. But I was also curious, does constantly being online change the way we think and process information? Does it change the way we organizationally and operationally move through our life, like it seems to have done with iGen? And for me, a hyper obsession with safety and living life through your phone eventually makes us less human. So if we are constantly operating through the internet, does that make us operate more like a computer as well? So thankfully, there's another excellent book that I was able to turn to and get my questions answered. And again, sadly, the short answer is yes. I brought this book here today. Oops. So, in The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, Nicholas Carr discusses the major shifts in communication that we've experienced as a society, but argues that the internet is unique in changing our ability to process information and the way that we think. We have hard evidence showing that the way we read on a screen differs greatly from the way we read books. When you read a web page, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, we tend to skim, scan, skip, scroll, click another link. Oh, maybe we bumped an ad or we bumped that ad on purpose, open another window, maybe open another desktop if we have another idea. All of which means more distraction, less deep reading and comprehension. We've become browsers and word spotters rather than deep readers. And this is hugely problematic, especially when we expect young people to be adept at using the internet productively, which is what we're expecting in school right now, when they never really developed that deep reading practice in the first place, right? It's hard enough for adults to deep read on a screen. How can we expect children to do the same? This is one of the many problems that I feel relying fully on technology in the classroom is creating, and far too few educators are warning the alarm bells, in my opinion. Furthermore, we're actually getting worse at solving problems as more and more advanced software aids us in more and more ways. And this is where I'd love to go on a huge tangent about ChatGPT. As Debra mentioned, 5G should really be called AI, or the Internet of Things infrastructure. And AI tools being free and available to students are just helping us on our way to that reality, but that is a subject for another talk, so we will save that for next time. So similarly, while reading Twangy's book, she had another great study that they took a screenshot of the college student's computer every 5 seconds. And they determined that college students, while working on a computer, switch between tasks every 19 seconds. And on average, that computer window is open less than a minute. So this is not the deep reading and introspective thought that used to define the college experience. And really quick, is it any wonder that there is a meteoric rise in ADHD rates in young people? As Knowable magazine readily admits, it is likely higher diagnosed than what is really the true prevalence, but just how much of this is influenced by iGen being raised by the internet, smartphones, and social media. So what are schools doing about it, you might be wondering? So in my experience across 5 years at 3 different schools in Hawaii, I was the only teacher raising this issue, and especially since the pandemic, school has universally shifted onto devices, right? With everything being mediated through Google Classroom, the entire Department of Education in Hawaii subscribes to Google Suites. That means all of our sensitive student information is all available to Google, right? All of this work that teachers are doing, in my opinion, we are training the AI in this moment to be teaching students, but again, that is a issue for another time. Yes, unless you elect to take things offline like I myself have done, and even then, it is hard to get students to complete it that way, right? Especially with them all hating their handwriting because we didn't spend the time to teach it in 3rd grade. But in America, it seems that the wealthiest private schools are aware of these issues, as well as some being aware of the EMF issue. And one example I like to use is the Waldorf schools, which prohibit technology use until the older level grades of high school, and even direct parents in their parent handbook that the ideal amount of tech time for developing children is none. And the best part is that Waldorf schools are notorious for educating the children of Silicon Valley executives. But as we've been saying throughout today, it is not hopeless. There are some quite inspiring cases in other countries across the world, so I'd just like to share a few. Multiple presentations today have mentioned the Environmental Health Trust, and I highly suggest you check out that website. All of this information about schools is available on there with links to learn more. But real quickly, France has banned Wi-Fi in kindergarten, restricts Wi-Fi in school by having the wireless off as a default setting, and teachers have wired, not wireless computers for internet access. France has also banned cell phones in elementary and middle schools and started educating the public to reduce exposure. Similarly, Cyprus has likewise removed Wi-Fi from elementary classrooms and has a strong public awareness campaign educating parents, teenagers, and pregnant women about the dangers of EMF. Belgium has banned cell phones manufactured for young children and has also banned Wi-Fi in kindergartens of Ghent. And Israel has banned Wi-Fi in nursery schools, restricts Wi-Fi in elementary grades, and bans cell phones in the classroom. Israel also has a national institution educating on how to reduce cell phone radiation. So as I said, Environmental Health Trust has all these links and a few other countries if you are more interested. Here in the US, it's a slightly different picture. There's a lot of politics with school districts and all that type of stuff, which we are not going to get into today, but certain school districts are aware and taking steps to mitigate the issue, as well as certain US cities, while other cities and school districts are installing cell phone antennas right in their football fields and playgrounds, which I personally saw on Oahu. So now this takes me to my unit. As Ian mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, we both witnessed some really sneaky installation of cell towers, usually in the night, and then the next day, all of a sudden they're there. It got to the point where I tried to count my towers on the way to work coming from central urban Honolulu to Kapolei, and I lost count around 100. And so I started taking pictures, trying to point them out to people, like, did you notice this? My mom, my coworkers, my friends. And then I decided it's time to take it to my students. So I wanted to make a unit. This unit has evolved over the few years that I've run it. It started with 7th graders, so it was a lot shorter. And then last year I did it with my high schoolers, and I've now settled on keeping it in my 10th grade ELA unit, which focuses on dystopian literature, so I thought it was a great place to plug it in there, and propaganda. So this is quite a huge topic, so I've settled it into the following stages. The first is knowledge building, then we measure our school environment, and importantly, the students' devices that they use on the daily, and if they want to bring anything from home. Then we consult with an expert. Dr. Greene has so graciously Zoomed with my students multiple times to be our expert. Then we write a lab report to communicate our findings, and then finally cap it off with writing letters to send to our county council members advocating for no more cell towers to be installed near schools and residences. So there's a lot of ways to preface this unit, but I found the best way is to ask kids, how do you feel about your cell phone? And they will readily tell you that their cell phone is their bae, their girlfriend, their boyfriend. They can't live without it. It's better than any person in their life, right? So I like to start by showing Netflix's The Social Dilemma. I don't agree with all the points in that documentary, so I did edit it out a little just to condense it and keep it down. But it does a good job of laying the foundation of where we are now with big tech and especially big data. And the key takeaway I want to use from that film is that if the product is free, you are the product. And that is the biggest, like, for kids, right? Like, what? I thought it was just nothing, right? Last year, I also introduced another topic about smart cities after I also witnessed that R2-D2 camera following me around in downtown Honolulu over a winter break. I felt it starting, right? So I was like, guys, do you know what a smart city is? And so I introduced the topic of the Internet of Things. We took a look at the multiple real-world examples that are already popping up. If you've heard of Toyota's Woven City, another really controversial one is called The Wall. And this built a nice foundation to kind of understand what we're talking about when we talk about 5G infrastructure, wireless radiation infrastructure, and all of this would be necessary for a smart city as designed to operate properly. So this was just my little, what we did and now where we're going. I then take the time to try to show students what we're looking at, right? So this was my drive in Honolulu. This is the high school that I was just talking about, Kapolei. I think there was one more blocked by this tree, but I'm not sure. But here's an apparatus, here's an apparatus. This was all on my way to work, right? So when we're looking out in the wild, like, where are we spotting it, right? I then share some of the slides I've developed, which is kind of like everything we've gone over today, but really condensed for kids, just simplified for students. And of course, there's still always some skeptics, right? So I take some time to do a station activity, let them read some passages from a really great book that I wanted to bring today, but I couldn't find it this morning. I'm so sorry, but it's this one, Radiation Nation. It rhymes if you have trouble remembering, but it has really great pictures of all the tumors. It's very compelling. So we do that station activity. And then lastly, as it's an English class, I always focus on the propaganda aspect of this issue to review the difference between the public messaging and the marketing terms versus what's the reality of the health impacts, just like our tobacco industry. So here are two commercials that I really like to use. The rollout of 5G with T-Mobile mimics exactly launching a nuke, right? With the two-man rule, two people need to turn their key at the same time. So I just asked them, why do you think? They mimicked that in the commercial. And of course they're doing it as a positive thing, right? Positively turning on this 5G, but what are they really doing? And this commercial is not from America, but it shows that with 5G, we are taking those steps into living our life in the metaverse, right? Living our life in augmented reality. And it shows that with 5G, you have all these fast download speeds, you can play online really easily, and that's just a good a good commercial to look at to kind of preface everything. All right, so the biggest hit with students is always having them measuring their phones and devices, after, of course, measuring the classroom, their school-assigned Chromebooks, and then the outside environment. So once we find a spot outside that's kind of neutral, this was really challenging in Oahu, but at my school now it's quite easy. We just walk up the hill a little bit. We then measure our devices one by one, going through all the modes. So we first turn off everything and put it in airplane mode, and this is the students' phones with the model, and then down here is a tablet and the Apple Watch, so that's why not everything's filled in. Then we do just Bluetooth on, then just Wi-Fi on, then Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on, and then finally the full-blown regular mode, you turn it with the cell towers, right? So importantly to note, the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter that we use to do our readings only goes up to 2,500,000. So this is not really accurate because it could be more than this, and we just don't know because that's our meters maxed out at that point. So that's also really mind-blowing for my students. It's like, but they're like, what's the number? And I'm like, we just don't know. It's too high, right? So after our data gathering, Dr. Greene is always kind enough to Zoom with my students, so I have them prepare some questions for her. She goes through a very similar presentation as she did so today with you all, and then they ask their questions, and then as it is an English assignment, I want them to write. So the first part of that is to write our lab report. Oh, real quick, these are some thank you notes from my students to Debra. A lot of them are claiming that they no longer carry their cell phone in their pocket. I hope that's true, but I do still see a lot of cell phones in their pockets. But yes, so lots of impacts that I feel, and they still do remember this. I continue reinforcing it. I talk a lot about AI and tech and ChatGPT just as a teacher. Yes, question?
15 years ago, or whenever I was in Oahu, the schools would not allow kids to bring.
I would like that to be the case again. So those are some thank yous. And then at my school, I don't know why, but I feel that this is just a general decline in writing across the curriculum, but they do not learn how to write a lab report ever in science. So last year I had graduating seniors who never wrote a lab report, don't know what's in a lab report, which I thought was crazy. So I taught them the parts of a lab report. I wrote the hard parts, and they wrote our results because we measured it all together, and then their hard task was the discussion, right? What does it mean? Why does it matter? So that was just some screenshots of what I gave them. These are then some of my letters that the students wrote to our county council members. They wrote one letter. We talked about how to write a business letter, how to format it, all of that kind of fun stuff. And then I printed 9 copies of the same letter to send to all our county council people. And it turned out to be over 300 letters, so I had to do a little donor's choose to get the money for all that postage, but it all worked out. It was, I hope it was fun for them getting all those letters to their office. So surprisingly, we actually did get 2 responses. If you read them, they're a tiny just bit disappointing in their content, mostly thanking the students for engaging in the process and not really saying one way or the other whether they support it or not, but you know, politicians. But my students were quick to pick up on this, which I also appreciated. So these are some reflections that they wrote. They were really surprised that the council members actually responded because they were all like, no one's gonna write back. And I was like, we'll see. And so we did get 2 back. But it was funny when they actually read it that they weren't really taking a stance one way or the other. But at the end of it, they were glad that they learned how to speak up, write letters, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested, I do have a website. I don't know if I can launch it right now, but all of this is available on my website, my full PowerPoints, my full units. The exemplars that I felt were the best from the students are all on there, and anyone can go look at it for free, so it's all there. Yes, I don't know where the mouse is, but if you Google Sarah Mudrick, it might come up. Yeah, it should. If you click that website. Yes, okay, so it is on the advocacy tab, and there is a link at the top with all the stuff, because it's not just that, but if you click on the wireless radiation tab, it shows a lot of the things I just showed to you, but I put the full things like how I graded them so teachers could do the same, get those rubrics. Here's them writing their lab report. This is what I just showed you again. All their thank yous, the questions that the students wrote to Debra, if it loads. This is Debra's full presentation with some of my student questions, Safe Tech Hawaii website, and then just my spiel in the beginning. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening.